Hi guys, I'm Mike.
And I'm Ash.
And this is F1 Fanatics. Welcome back to part 2 of our season ratings video. And Ash is back.
Yeah, I was here last time.
He's been
but
unblown up. You're not blown up anymore.
No.
Unblown up doesn't quite sound right. But he's here in physical form, and he can actually give his rating and a reason why you gave your rating.
Yeah, it'll be good to do that because, you know, I did the last video and... Panicked message from Mike. Can you remember what your ratings were? Not really.
No, it happened. But anyway, today, Ash is back. We are here. Part 2 of our season ratings, and it is Formula 1.5 we are looking at today, which means that we have the best of the rest of McLaren, Renault, Toro Rosso and Racing Point, as formerly known as Sahara Force India, because you can't really get Racing Point gear at the moment.
You can get it, it's just not great.
Force India stuff's better, is what we're saying. Right. And they're pretty much the same team. So guys, what we'll do, like we did last time out with the season ratings, is we will give a rating out of 10 for the drivers in the team and also for the constructor as well. So yeah, and we'll give our thoughts on why we gave those ratings, and then it is over to you and what you guys think about our ratings and whether you agree with them or not.
Exactly.
But we're going to go and get ahead into our ratings. So starting off with McLaren, and starting off with the guy who finished 6th in the Drivers' Constructors title. Now there's Carlos Sainz, and for me, 9 out of 10.
I'd agree, 9 out of 10 as well. Definitely best. Well, I didn't like calling him best of the rest because he did too well. He sort of went into a championship of his own and got best of the rest in the... Well, he didn't. He got 6th, didn't he? And so actually, one step up, considering the two people that he was fighting for that spent half a season each in a Red Bull.
Yeah, and so for me, why I gave Carlos Sainz a 9 out of 10 was he has been Mr. Consistent all season. He had a bit of a rocky start to his time at McLaren. I think it was a mechanical failure in Australia and in a couple of incidents in Bahrain and China, but after that Carlos Sainz has been pretty much flawless all season. Again, the start of the second half of the season wasn't great, but those things were out of his control, those incidents, and topped off really by securing a podium in Brazil, McLaren's first since 2014, in Australia with Jenson Button and Kevin Magnussen, and yeah, fantastic season for Carlos.
I'd agree, and the biggest compliment we can actually give him is the fact that he went about his business and didn't really get involved in too much. He was so superior to the rest of the guys really in terms of that battle he was having in race spec really. Not quite able to get that gap down consistently to the top guys, but also having the limitations with the car. But was able to challenge and pick up places when there were retirements ahead of him, which is what he was required to do this season. So, fantastic season for him all round.
Yeah, and that moves us on to his teammate, and that is Lando Norris. And for me, Lando Norris scores an 8 out of 10.
7, slightly lower.
But at least we've differed. Yeah. Oh, the last video I was like, I'm really sorry, we keep agreeing with everything. Yeah. But we differed, so it's good. So for my reasons why I've given Lando Norris an 8 out of 10, I think he has had an absolutely superb rookie season. He has beaten his more experienced teammate in Carlos Sainz in qualifying. That last one out in Abu Dhabi, beating him 11-10 in that head-to-head. And the criticisms, or more constructive criticisms that Ash and me might have had of him in the summer break, was that he needed to improve on a Sunday more in the race. He was fantastic qualifying in the first half, but needed to mature a bit in the races, and I think he has done. And a lot of his issues, coping in his rookie season with all the mechanical issues that he's had to cope with, they've been out of his control. Mightily impressive by Lando Norris. A really kind of standout rookie season for me.
I'd agree, standout rookie season. I would vote him rookie of the season. I don't think anyone will argue with that one. Maybe Alex Albon.
Well, with the F1 awards last night, this is recording on the Saturday, so it was Friday. Alex Albon was awarded Rookie of the Year.
Yeah.
We disagree.
I think that was swayed slightly by the fact he was in a Red Bull and was able to have the second half of the season that he did. But for me, Rookie of the Season was Lando Norris. Qualifying was fantastic, but that was a complete season side of things. Overall season, I think he kicked on in the second half of the season, which was good. It was just that race performances on the first half that not necessarily let him down, but could have been that step up. Can't really go much higher than a 7 though, because it would have been nicer to see him closer to Carlos Sainz. I'm being really picky here with this one, aren't I?
Yeah.
But it would have been, considering the fact that he beat Carlos Sainz in qualifying and showed that on one lap pace he could match and beat his teammate, it would have been nicer to have seen him closer to him in the races. There were quite a few where Carlos Sainz had gone off and was getting 5th and 6th, but Lando was then nearer the tail end of the points. So I think that would be the one thing for next season. Try and just get that little bit closer on a Sunday to Carlos Sainz now.
Moving on to his teammate. We've done teammates. Moving on to the team itself. That's what I mean in that aspect. And that is, of course, McLaren. And for me, 8 out of 10.
I'd agree with an 8 for the team.
I think how they've progressed from last year, obviously training towards more the back end of the field, and the way that they've put everything together, the kind of positive atmosphere that McLaren have put in place, the results that they have got, finishing 4th in the Constructors, which is a massive achievement for them this season, where, like we said, where they were from last year. Just mightily impressive from how they've worked, the performances, the way that they've done it. I think you think that their chassis is one of the best chassis on the grid currently this year, and the development that they've pushed forward and how they've gained 4th, just impressive for me.
Would totally agree. They started off the season with a brilliant chassis. We all saw it last season. We knew that there was the potential in the car, and they've kicked on. And where other teams have faltered, McLaren haven't. They had Spa, which was an unfortunate one because of the double retirement, and then it was, what was the one after where Sainz retired and McLaren and Lando dropped off? Oh, what was it? It wasn't Monza.
Spa?
No, Spa, they both retired. What was after Monza? I've gone blank.
Singapore,
Sainz was out of the points, wasn't he?
Mm.
It might have been Singapore. I've gone blank.
But Sainz was involved in that collision with Hülkenberg at the start, wasn't he?
I can't think now, but there was a couple of races where they dropped off slightly, but across the whole of the season, the majority of the time, they were consistently there where other teams dropped off. So they've managed to sort out reliability issues, and it's just rectified a dynamic that wasn't too great the season before, so 2018. So really good work and fantastic effort by the team.
Yeah, and that moves us on to the second team within that. Oh, we should probably... Yeah, we did say that we were in Formula 1.5, didn't we?
Yeah.
Losing track of where we go and things. Renault, who finished 5th in the Constructors this year, and the driver who finished highest, and that is Daniel Ricciardo. And for me, 8 out of 10 for his season.
7.
And for me, why I gave an 8 out of 10 is considering that Daniel Ricciardo has come from Red Bull and having to adapt to a new team, a new way of working in a worse car than what he's been in Red Bull, and the way that he's beaten an experienced teammate within that team, and quite convincingly on my half in the end of how he beat Nico Hülkenberg. His performances, like in Monza, were superb, where obviously they secured their highest position of the season, which was 4th. And yeah, he's just been a consistent performer, especially in the second half of the season, where everything's fallen into place. So a pretty good stepping block for Daniel Ricciardo in 2020.
settling in is probably the way I would describe this season for Daniel Ricciardo. He's outperformed Hülkenberg across the year. I would say he's looked better than his performances have shown because of reliability issues around that area and ahead of him on the grid. So there's been races where he has got fantastic results, but if you look at Monza, for example, you had Sebastian Vettel drop right off because of his accident. You had Max Verstappen starting at the back, who then also had an incident going into turn 1. So it was already 2 drivers ahead that had dropped off. You then had Alex Albon, who went wide when battling with Sainz that caused damage for both, I think it was, in the end. So it was a settling in season. I don't think you can say he's overachieved. He's sort of been in and around where he should have been. It would have been nicer to have seen, it's another one, it would have been nicer to have seen him battling with Sainz more consistently. And that would have been where the extra points would have come in for his rating.
Yeah. And we move on to his teammate now. That's good, this. We're disagreeing. This is good for you guys. It's different, and he's here, so we can put it across.
Yeah, exactly.
So his teammate, Nico Hülkenberg. For me, 5 out of 10.
I wanted to say 6, but I'm thinking about it in 5 and 5. I'm going to go 6 so we stay different.
Okay. For me, Nico Hülkenberg, 5 out of 10. This was one of the teammate partnerships that I was really looking forward to at the start of the season. And for me, it is one of the teammate ones that have failed to live up to expectation. Where the Leclerc-Vettel one has obviously lived up to expectation and given us lots of excitement. Nico Hülkenberg, well established within the Renault team with a high reputation of being a guy who is one of these top of the midfields, finishing best of the rest in 2018. He's had less reliability issues than Daniel Ricciardo, and in the second half of the season, where both of them were comfortable with the car, Nico Hülkenberg's performances, I think in every points finish that they've done together, he is finished behind Daniel Ricciardo. And when they've raced on track, they haven't really competed. There hasn't been really many battles or fighting positions between them. That might have been internal. I don't know. I don't know if, especially second half of the season when we knew Nico was leaving and obviously Daniel was staying.
Based on the interviews together, though, they did seem to be a tight knit.
Yeah, exactly. So it doesn't necessarily see there. I was just disappointed for Nico Hülkenberg because I was just screaming for him. And Hockenheim, you know, I was just screaming for him, take the situation with both hands. You know, prove something. Prove you're the driver that everyone thinks he is. And for me, he's let me down. Oh, not me personally, but you know, he's let down on that aspect, in my opinion.
If Daniel Ricciardo was meeting expectations, if you've got a driver that's not matching if he's not matching his teammate, you can't look at him and say he's had a great season. I think the main issue I've had with Hülkenberg this season is there was all of the will he, won't he with signing a contract with Renault. Ocon came out, was announced, and then it was will he, won't he with Haas. Once Roman Grosjean was announced, he pretty much checked out. I didn't see any of that fight. He did well in the fact that he was consistently in and around the points, which is what Renault were wanting, but he lost that fight at the end of the season, which is understandable when he's known F1 now for 10 years.
10 years, yeah.
10 years is a long time to be in an environment like Formula 1. So to get to the end of that, then it is always going to be a little bit disheartening. But he was fighting for a seat. Was he going to get one in 2020? It looked pretty clear he wasn't. But now the overriding view on Nico Hülkenberg is this second half of the season, which doesn't look great for him when he's looking for a seat for 2021. So, yeah, not the greatest. But he did consistently score points, which is one of his strengths. The majority of the time, though, it seemed to be 9th or 10th, which was the downside to that.
Yeah. So now we move on to the team that they both drove for. And for me, Renault as a constructor is going to be a 6 out of 10.
I'd agree, 6.
For me, why it's a 6 out of 10 in terms of finishing best of the rest last year with Nico Hülkenberg, and then obviously the big signing of Daniel Ricciardo, a driver who could propel the team forward. Again, they have suffered with engine issues. To their credit, not as much as they have done in previous, but their aero package wasn't up to the standard of McLaren. So, because you have to say, McLaren and Renault have the both same engine, so it's not a power unit issue. It then is purely down to the aerodynamic package, and they weren't able to keep up to track with there. They did a bit like Ferrari in some ways. They did very positive on the low drag setup, so they were better at Canada, they were better at Monza, those kind of quicker circuits. But yeah, when they're kind of having a good amount of downforce on the car or a better aero package, they seem to struggle, and that's certainly where they need to pick up for next year.
Quite simply, McLaren. A customer team outperformed them on, I would say, 17, maybe 18 of the 21 races this season. Can't say much more than that, really. Imagine if you had Ferrari being outperformed by Haas, or Mercedes being outperformed by Williams, or Force India, Racing Point, even. Honestly, that shouldn't really be happening. It's as simple as that on that one.
And there, that wraps up Renault, and that was a purely positive note to kind of end on from there. We now move on to Toro Rosso, finishing 6th in the Constructors, and for Toro Rosso, who are a sister team, I think that's mightily impressive. Finishing ahead of Racing Point, and also running Renault pretty much to the last race. It was still, although an outside chance at the end, there was still a possibility of them overtaking. And we are going to look at Pierre Gasly for this one. He did finish higher than Kvyat in the racing, obviously having that half season at Red Bull. And for me, Pierre Gasly scores a 7 out of 10.
I agree, 7.
For me, why he scores a 7 out of 10, obviously we spoke about it at length in the summer. His performances in the Red Bull weren't good enough. Did he deserve to be dropped? Yes. Was he handled in the right way of being dropped? Probably not. And how he's been handled since by Red Bull? Probably not. But what he has done in a Toro Rosso, in a car that Daniel Kvyat was flying in, yes, Daniel Kvyat, will come and talk about him, struggled a little bit with some mechanical issues, but Gasly's way that he's picked himself up, and it shows the importance of how good you can perform in a car that is built around you. And the 2019 Toro Rosso is very similar to the 2018 that Gasly performed well in. And obviously getting that 2nd place in Brazil, absolutely superb drive by Pierre Gasly. It can't be higher than a 7 out of 10 because of what happened pre the summer break. But ever since the summer break, he's been one of the drivers on the grid this second half of the season.
Totally agree. It shows what the difference a slight change can be. He's gone to a car that fits his driving style, and it's back to the Pierre Gasly we saw last season. Red Bull just wasn't right for him, and we said it multiple times. He needed to get back to what he knew, and Toro Rosso was that. And he outperformed Kvyat easily. Like, he wiped the floor with him, really, didn't he? Second half of the season. Fantastic effort then.
And we now move on to his teammate Daniel Kvyat, and for me, this is a tough one. I'm going to go for a 7 out of 10 as well.
5.
Oh, look at that. Brutal. This will be interesting. For me, Daniel Kvyat had a very good first half of the season. Obviously topped off by that performance in Hockenheim, where he secured 3rd, and Toro Rosso's 2nd podium. It now is their 3rd best result, because who would have thought at the start of the season that Toro Rosso would get 2 podiums this season? Since the summer break, I'm going to be a little kinder to him, because I think the way that Red Bull treated him, I still think Daniel Kvyat on merit was the guy that Red Bull should have gone for. Alex Albon has performed well since then, but on who deserved it on performance within the team, it should have been Daniel Kvyat. And the way that Helmut Marko and Christian Horner have naturally spoken, or lack of speaking about him, I think affected him. And what cost him when he got dropped from Red Bull initially, he was affected emotionally and performances at Toro Rosso weren't great, I think has happened in the second half of this season. We've seen a little bit more of a return of the torpedo, but he did have a strong finish in Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. It was a more solid and better drive from him, obviously working on his tyres better. So yeah, I think it's been certainly a tale of two halves of Daniel, and a 7 out of 10 for me.
If we're going to say that Pierre Gasly had an awful first half of the season and a great second half of the season, Kvyat was the complete opposite of that. And it was ridiculous how quickly he dropped back into almost torpedo-esque. Yes, there would have been the dissatisfaction with the fact that he didn't get the promotion into the Red Bull seat, but Gasly had the same thing in the fact that he was dropped from Red Bull and he used it as a motivator to kick on. Kvyat almost just dropped off completely and then was in a position where he was going for moves that he should never have been attempting, was causing collisions that were beyond ridiculous. Like Mexico, for example, there was never an opportunity there.
Yeah.
It just went back to the Kvyat of old, and it was in a position where all of the good work he had done at the start of the season was ruined by the second half. And if there ever was a consideration of who would actually have that seat at Red Bull, his second half of the season was what would have been a decider, I think, rather than Albon's.
I think what did it for him was by Sochi, and he'd been very unlucky up until Sochi. And by Sochi, Helmut Marko had already said that Daniel Kvyat was out of consideration. And instead of going, you know what, screw you, I'm going to still outperform this car and make it look ridiculous you're not picking me, he went into a shell, and like you said, the racing craft went out the window a bit. But we now move on to their team. And Toro Rosso, 8 out of 10 for me.
7 out of 10.
For a team that is a sister team, and considering the resources that are available to them, to be challenging the likes of a Renault in the Constructors' Championship. Yes, obviously Renault have had some issues throughout, but it shouldn't be taken away how well Toro Rosso have done. And they've got 2 podiums in a season where in an era that's been dominated by Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull podiums, and in their history as a team, they have, as Toro Rosso as it is, they've only got 1 podium before, which was obviously a win by Sebastian Vettel back in 2008. So yeah, 2 in 1 season. Incredible effort by the lads at Toro Rosso.
I still think they were 2 hit and miss. There were a couple of races where they were right off the pace and were almost down with the Hasses and the Alphas, which was definitely not where they were meant to be for the season. So I think that was the main issue. It was getting that balance right. When they had good weekends, they had brilliant weekends, but when they had poor weekends, they were incredibly poor. So it just needs to find that balance in the middle. Yeah,
I think that is a fair point to make, and we move on to the last team of this video. Thank you for sticking around with us. Obviously that Formula 1.5, it made sense to kind of link them all together, but hopefully you've enjoyed up until it. So the last team is Racing Point, and the driver who finished highest in the Drivers' Championship, and actually I think sneaking into the top 10 overall with that last race performance, that is Sergio Perez. And for me, Sergio Perez gets an 8 out of 10.
7 out of 10.
Why? There's a bit of a theme coming with the 8 and 7s. For me, why Sergio Perez gets an 8 out of 10, the Racing Point was always going to struggle in the first half of the season, because obviously with the financial insecurity with obviously losing as Force India, and Lawrence Stroll having to take over at kind of the last hour came in with there wasn't really development for the 2019 season, would have been halted, as they probably weren't sure at some point whether they were going to be actually competing in it or not. A kind of mixed first start. Obviously, Sergio Perez had a long distance of a points finish between Azerbaijan and Spa, but after the second half of the season started and it really saw the backing of Lawrence Stroll and Racing Point getting their car development right, he has been absolutely superb and my driver of the second half of the season, because he has scored a points finish in every single race in that Racing Point, bar Singapore, which was an engine issue, which you can't really be blamed for in that aspect. Yes, there were some mistakes in the first half, which is why it's not rated higher, but I think it's been an incredibly impressive performance by Sergio Perez this year.
Mistakes in the first half of the season, improved, and then consistency through the second. That's the main reason why 7. It's one of those where he didn't bring a whole season together, so I'm not really wanting to go too much higher because of that.
I think a lot of drivers struggled to put a kind of consistent season together. And now we move on to his teammate Lance Stroll. And if you were with us in the summer, you remember our mid-season ratings were very harsh on Lance Stroll, me in particular. And since then, I've done some thinking and I've reconciled, and I was too harsh on Lance Stroll. I'm going to give him a 5 out of 10 overall for the season, just because he's 5 out of 10, and I'll go on and explain.
6 out of 10.
So yeah, I was too harsh on Lance Stroll. In a team where his dad owns it, that's basically run by Sergio Perez, has a lot of backing and internal stuff within the team, and had secured still their best result of the season in terms of that 4th in Hockenheim. He's not had a bad first season at Racing Point. But for me, his qualifying has been so poor. It has shown signs of improving in the second half of the season. It just always puts him on the back foot. If I kind of think I've said it in the video where we did our F1 Worldwide with Mark, or I might have just chatted with him in general. If Lewis Hamilton was always starting 6th because his qualifying was terrible, he would find it hard to win the amount of races that he wins. A positive of qualifying is it puts you in a good position so you avoid some battles, and the more battles you have to be involved in, the more difficult it is to progress in a race. So Lance Stroll's always on the back foot. He was unlucky in Monza with the Vettel incident, and he was unlucky, I think it was Brazil, that he retired with the suspension, getting some of the debris from the Vettel and Leclerc clash caught in when he was on for a points finish.
Basically, Vettel was his downfall.
Yeah, basically. Vettel really doesn't like Lance Stroll. But, he can't be higher because Perez has convincingly beaten him as a teammate.
The one thing I would say is, yes, his qualifying hasn't been the best, but that has shown signs of improving since the summer break. And even though he does seem to start nearer the back of the grid for the majority of the time, he has made up the most places on the first lap this season, which I think was 33 in the end. I'm trying to remember it. I did have a look and check it.
I think it might have been even higher as the 50s.
Well, that's more than I would have thought. I'm trying to remember, can't. But he's made up the most places, so yes, he's getting in a position where he's having to have more battles, but he is getting those battles dealt with early on, meaning that he can then get into his race. So improvement still needed, but it's getting there.
Yeah. And now we look at Racing Point as a whole, and it's a 7 out of 10 for me.
6 out of 10.
7 out of 10 because the main criticism you can have of Racing Point this season was out of their control. Financial backing. Nobody knew what was going on last season until Lawrence came in back, and that means that they were behind where other teams were. Not as far behind as what Williams appeared to be. But yeah, they struggled. They were always playing catch up, but once they got it all together after the summer break, they have pushed on well, they have shown good car development, and they have had good performances within the race. finishing best of the rest in Mexico and Abu Dhabi. Pretty impressive from them, but it can't go higher because of that first half of the season, although it was out of their control.
Just a season that they will want to write off. It wasn't going to be their best. They had constraints on them and didn't start the season well, understandably, but the kicking on side of things that you look at with the likes of McLaren and Renault was a lot bigger. They didn't take that step up through the season where they've had that time to start the development process. So I just feel as if they could have taken a bigger jump in terms of their performances.
And that, guys, rounds off part 2 of our season ratings. We hope you've enjoyed it. We would love to hear from you guys. Give it a thumbs up if you've enjoyed it, and love to hear from you guys in the comments what you think. Do you agree with our ratings? Do you disagree with our ratings? Yeah, it's been an interesting team for a lot of drivers within there and a lot of teams as well. So it would be great to hear from you guys in the comments. As always, we love having a discussion and debate with you guys. Yeah, to kind of see what your point of view is as well. And Ash, what else can you do?
Make sure to press the subscribe button so our videos go into your YouTube inbox. And if you press the bell icon, you will get a notification when one of our videos goes live, and you'll be able to see the next part of this mini-series.
And the final part, where we will obviously look at the 3 teams we haven't in Haas, Alfa Romeo and Williams. But for now, you F1 fans, keep racing!